In my 30 years wearing this badge, I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. on Highway 35, just outside Fredericksburg. Small animal blocking traffic, dispatch said. Routine stuff. But when I pulled up and saw her, a bobcat no bigger than a house cat, sitting dead center in the right lane, my blood ran cold. She wasn't just blocking traffic. She was crying, real tears streaming down that spotted face, leaving dark tracks in the dust. Cars backed up for a quarter-mile, folks standing outside their vehicles, phones out, filming this little creature's breakdown. And those eyes. Lord help me, those golden eyes held more pain than I'd seen in most humans. The clock read 2:52 p.m. 4 hours of daylight left, and something deep in my gut told me this wasn't about some lost animal. This was about something much bigger, something that would change everything. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Officer Jake Thompson adjusted his Stetson against the Texas sun, squinting at the small crowd gathering around their vehicles. At 58, he'd planned to retire in 30 days, trade his badge for fishing poles and maybe some peace. His empty lunchbox sat on the passenger seat next to a stack of unopened mail, mostly condolence cards he couldn't bear to read. Mary had been gone 6 months now, and the house still smelled like her lavender soap. The Bobcat, Luna someone was calling her, hadn't moved from her spot in the lane. Cars honked, drivers shouted, but she just sat there crying those impossible tears. Jake had seen wounded animals before, plenty of them, but nothing like this. The way she looked at each passing car, like she was searching for something or someone. "Officer, you gonna do something about that cat?" A man in a Cowboys jersey mopped sweat from his forehead. "My kid's got a baseball game in Kerrville." "We're already late." Jake nodded but didn't take his eyes off Luna. Something wasn't right here. Wild bobcats didn't cry. They sure as hell didn't plant themselves in traffic and refuse to budge. His radio crackled. Backup was 40 minutes out, animal control an hour behind that. The afternoon sun was brutal, pushing toward 100 degrees, and that little creature was baking on the asphalt. "Look at her collar," a teenage girl whispered to her mother, phone still recording. "It's got writing on it." Jake stepped closer, heart hammering against his ribs. Sure enough, a red collar circled Luna's neck, and even from 20 feet away, he could make out letters, H-E-L-P. The rest was too small to read, but the message was clear enough. A pickup truck pulled alongside the crowd and Jake's stomach dropped. His grandson Tommy climbed out, all 16 years of anger and attitude, wearing that same look he'd given Jake at Mary's funeral. The boy hadn't spoken to him since that day, when Jake chose duty over family and missed Mary's last hours for some damn robbery call. "Grandpa Joe?" Tommy's voice cracked with surprise. "What's all this about?" "Wild animal situation," Jake said, not meeting the boy's eyes. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Luna turned at the sound of Tommy's voice, and something passed between them. Recognition? Hope? Jake couldn't say, but the crying stopped for just a moment, and in that silence he heard it. The faint sound of a cell phone ringing somewhere deep in the woods beyond the highway. 3 short rings, then silence, then 3 more. Someone was out there. Someone was in trouble. And somehow this little broken-hearted bobcat knew exactly where to find them. The ringing stopped, but the memory it triggered hit Jake like a sledgehammer to the chest. 10 years ago, almost to the day, his daughter Sarah had gone camping in these same woods with her college friends. What was supposed to be a weekend getaway turned into the longest 48 hours of Jake's life. Sarah had wandered off from the campsite that October evening, chasing what she later described as the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen. But when darkness fell and temperatures dropped into the 30s, that beauty became a death trap. She'd slipped on wet leaves, twisted her ankle badly, and found herself lost in a maze of cedar and oak with nothing but a t-shirt and jeans. Jake remembered the call from the park ranger like it was yesterday. "We've got a missing person, Officer Thompson. Your daughter. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but—" The pause that followed contained every parent's worst nightmare. For 18 hours, teams combed those woods while Jake paced the command tent, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. Mary had driven up from Austin, her face gray with worry, clutching Sarah's childhood teddy bear like it could somehow pull their baby back from the darkness. Then, just after dawn on the second day, they found her. But not the way anyone expected. Sarah was curled up in a small clearing, barely conscious from hypothermia, wrapped in what the medics first thought was a survival blanket. It wasn't until they got her to the ambulance that they realized the truth. She was covered in fur, bobcat fur. A mother bobcat and her 2 nearly grown kits had somehow found Sarah during the night and shared their body heat, probably saving her life. The medical team called it impossible. Wild bobcats didn't behave that way. They were solitary, territorial, dangerous around humans. But the evidence was undeniable. Sarah's clothes were covered in their scent, and her body temperature had been maintained just above the critical threshold. "They took turns," Sarah had whispered from her hospital bed, voice hoarse but alive. "The mama cat and her babies. They'd curl up against me for a while, then switch. Like they were taking care of me." Jake had wanted to go back, to find those cats somehow, to thank them. But life got in the way. Cases, responsibilities, the daily grind of police work. He'd always told himself he'd make time later. Later never came. Now, standing on Highway 35 with Luna crying at his feet, Jake felt the weight of that old debt pressing down on his shoulders. The bobcat's collar caught the light again, and this time he could make out more of the writing. Below the word "help," in smaller letters, "GPS tracker. Call 911. "Tommy," Jake called to his grandson, who was filming Luna with his phone like every other teenager in America. "Put that thing away and come here." "Why?" "This is going viral, Grandpa Joe. Look." Tommy held up his screen, showing dozens of comments pouring in. "People are sharing it everywhere. Luna cried is already trending." "I said, put it away." Jake's voice carried the authority of 3 decades on the force, and Tommy reluctantly pocketed the phone. "This isn't entertainment, son. This is someone asking for help." "It's just an animal," Tommy muttered, but he stepped closer. "Just an animal?" Jake knelt down, studying Luna's collar more carefully. The GPS tracker was a small black device, professional grade, the kind wildlife researchers used. But there was something else. Tiny scratches in the leather, worn spots that spoke of long wear. This wasn't a temporary research collar. This was personal. Luna met his eyes, and Jake saw something that made his breath catch. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. Purpose. She wasn't just crying, she was communicating. Those tears weren't random animal distress. They were deliberate, human-like, heartbreaking. "My grandfather used to say," Jake told Tommy, not taking his eyes off Luna, "that animals are better judges of character than most people. They don't lie, don't pretend, don't put on airs. When an animal asks for help, son, it's because someone truly needs it." The cell phone rang again from the woods, 3 short bursts, and Luna's head snapped toward the sound. She stood up, took a few steps toward the tree line, then looked back at Jake with what he could only describe as expectation. "She wants us to follow her," Tommy said, surprising Jake with the observation. "That's exactly what she wants." Jake felt his knees protest as he stood up. At 58, he wasn't built for hiking through rough terrain anymore. His left hip ached in this heat, a souvenir from a domestic disturbance call gone wrong 5 years back. But Luna was already moving toward the woods, pausing every few steps to ensure they were following. Jake radioed dispatch. Unit 247, I'm following an animal into the woods north of mile marker 87. Possible person in distress. Request backup and search and rescue. Copy that, 247. Be advised backup is 35 minutes out. Search and rescue is mobilizing but won't be on scene for at least an hour. 35 minutes. In this heat, with someone potentially injured or lost, that could be a lifetime. Jake looked at the thick cedar brakes ahead, remembering how easy it was to get turned around in there, how quickly day could turn to night under that canopy, how Sarah had almost died in woods just like these. We should wait for backup, Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's what I would have done 10 years ago, Jake replied, checking his service weapon and radio. Cost me the chance to say goodbye to your grandmother because I was following protocol instead of my heart. Tommy's face softened at the mention of Mary. Grandma wouldn't want you taking stupid risks. Your grandma would want me to help someone who needs it. Jake started toward the tree line, following Luna's lead. That's who she was. That's who she raised me to be, even when I forgot it sometimes. The woods swallowed them quickly, temperature dropping a blessed 10 degrees under the canopy. Luna moved with purpose now, no longer crying but making soft chirping sounds, glancing back frequently to make sure they were keeping up. The ground was uneven, scattered with loose rocks and hidden roots that caught at Jake's boots. Behind him, Tommy struggled with the terrain, his basketball shoes no match for hiking boots. "This is crazy, Grandpa Joe." "We don't even know if there's really someone out there." But Jake did know, in his gut the same way he'd known Sarah was alive when the odds said otherwise, the same way he'd known Mary was slipping away even when the doctors insisted her treatment was working. Some things didn't need proof. Some things just were. Luna stopped at a game trail and looked back at them, golden eyes reflecting the filtered sunlight. In that moment, Jake would have sworn she smiled. The game trail wound deeper into the cedar brakes, and Jake could feel his cell signal dying bar by bar. Luna maintained her steady pace, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or examine broken branches that meant nothing to human eyes, but clearly told her a story. Tommy struggled behind them, cursing under his breath every time a low branch caught his Lakers jersey. "How much farther, you think?" Tommy panted, sweat streaming down his face despite the shade. Jake was about to answer when Luna froze, her ears pricked forward. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound they'd been following, that cell phone ringing its urgent three-note pattern. But this time it was accompanied by something else, a voice, weak and hoarse, calling out, "Help! Please! Anyone!" "Jesus," Tommy whispered, his attitude evaporating. "There really is someone out there." They pushed forward, following Luna as she picked up speed, weaving between the trees with the fluid grace of her species. The voice grew stronger, more desperate, and Jake could make out words now. "Luna, girl, come back. Don't leave me." "Luna," Jake repeated, looking down at the bobcat trotting ahead of them. "He's calling for you, isn't he?" The cat turned at the sound of her name, and Jake saw something he'd never forget. Tears beginning to form in those golden eyes again. Not the desperate crying from the highway, but something softer. Relief, maybe. Hope. They crested a small ridge and found themselves looking down into a shallow depression filled with fallen logs and scattered boulders. At the bottom, partially hidden by deadfall, was a man. Even from 30 yards away, Jake could see he was in bad shape, clothes torn, face pale with exhaustion or blood loss, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. But it was what Jake saw next that stopped him cold. Scattered around the man were papers, dozens of them, weighed down with rocks or tucked under logs. From this distance, Jake couldn't read the writing, but the neat, deliberate arrangement sent alarm bells screaming in his head. 30 years of police work had taught him to recognize a scene, and this looked like someone who'd been preparing for something final. "Stay here," Jake told Tommy, but the boy was already moving, scrambling down the slope with the fearless stupidity of youth. "Sir, sir, can you hear me?" Tommy called out as he reached the bottom. "We're here to help. The police are here." The man's head turned slowly, and Jake got his first clear look at a face that would haunt him. Mid-30s, dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. Eyes that held the hollow look Jake had seen too many times in his career. The look of someone who'd reached the end of their rope and let go. You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice cracked and raw. "Dangerous. Told Luna to find help, but this isn't. I didn't want—" Jake reached the bottom of the depression and knelt beside the man, his training taking over despite the growing unease in his gut. "I'm Officer Thompson. What's your name, son?" David Mitchell." The man's eyes found Luna, who had curled up beside him, pressing her warm body against his side. She's been trying to save me all day, but I can't." Jake's hands moved automatically, checking for injuries. David's left leg was definitely broken, probably from a fall, but that wasn't what worried him. It was the deliberate way David had arranged himself here, the careful placement of those papers, the backpack positioned just so. Tommy was already gathering some of the scattered documents, his face growing pale as he read, "Grandpa Joe, you need to see this." One of the papers was a letter, written in careful block letters on notebook paper. Jake's blood turned to ice as he read the first few lines. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. Luna deserves better than what I can give her. She's ready for release back to the wild. Don't let my failures hold her back. Contact Dr. Rebecca Johnson at Hill Country Wildlife Sanctuary." "Son of a bitch," Jake breathed, the full picture coming together. "David, how long have you been out here?" Since yesterday morning." David's voice was getting weaker. "Brought Luna for her final assessment, last time before release. But I couldn't. After what happened in Afghanistan, after losing the team, I thought if I just—" "You thought you'd end it," Jake said quietly. "Out here, where someone would find Luna, but not until you were—" David nodded, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "But she wouldn't leave. Kept bringing me water in her mouth from the creek. Tried to drag branches to make shelter. When I tied the note to her collar and told her to go find people, she just looked at me and started crying." Tommy was reading more of the papers now, his hands shaking. "Grandpa Joe, there's a whole journal here. He's been planning this for weeks. Says he can't live with what he did over there, can't keep pretending he's okay." Jake felt the familiar weight of a life balanced on the edge of a knife. He'd talked down 3 potential suicides in his career, lost one. Each time it came down to finding the right words, the right connection, the right reason for someone to choose tomorrow over today. "David, look at me." Jake's voice carried the authority of 3 decades, but also something softer, understanding. "I know about Afghanistan. Lost my partner to a roadside bomb in '93, Bosnia peacekeeping mission. Came home and tried to drink away the guilt for 2 solid years." David's eyes focused on Jake's face for the first time since they'd found him. "You were military?" "Army Reserve. Did my 20. Thought I was done seeing good people die for bad reasons." Jake settled into a more comfortable position, accepting that this wasn't going to be a quick extraction. "What happened over there?" "IED," David whispered. "My unit was escorting a medical convoy. I saw something that looked wrong, called for a halt, but the lieutenant overruled me, said we were behind schedule." His voice broke. 3 vehicles hit the blast zone. 12 dead, including a nurse who was just trying to help people. Tommy had stopped reading and was listening now, his face pale with an understanding beyond his 16 years. Luna remained pressed against David's side, her purr a low, steady comfort in the growing darkness under the trees. "And you've been carrying that weight ever since," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "Every day, every night. Luna was supposed to be my therapy, part of my treatment at the VA. They said working with wildlife would help with the PTSD, and it did for a while. But she's ready now, ready to be wild again. And I thought if you thought if you died out here, she'd go back to being wild and everyone would be better off." David nodded, unable to speak. Jake looked around at the carefully arranged papers, the deliberate positioning of everything, and felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. Not at David, but at a system that sent young men to war and brought them home broken, at a country that thanked them for their service and then left them to fight their demons alone. "David, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen real careful." Jake leaned closer, his voice quiet but firm. "That Bobcat has been crying real tears for you. Not just today. I saw it in her eyes when we found you. She's been grieving for you, son, mourning what you were planning to do. You think animals don't understand death? You think she doesn't know what you intended?" Luna lifted her head at the sound of her name, those golden eyes moving between Jake and David with an intelligence that was almost human. "She saved your life by refusing to let you die alone," Jake continued. "Now the question is, what are you going to do with the life she gave you?" The cell phone rang again, closer now. Backup was coming, whether they could reach this spot or not. The radio crackled with static and Jake could barely make out dispatch through the interference. "Unit 247, your location. Backup attempting. Cannot reach." Jake keyed his radio. "Dispatch, we've located the subject. Adult male, broken leg, possible psychological crisis. Need medical evac, but terrain is rough. GPS coordinates." He rattled off their position as best he could estimate. "Copy 247. Search and rescue. ETA unknown. Due to terrain." The radio died to static. They were on their own. David was watching Luna with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. Part love, part guilt, part something deeper. "You want to know the real reason I brought her out here?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "It wasn't for her final assessment. It was because I couldn't stand the thought of her watching me. At home. Couldn't let her see that." Tommy had been quiet, but now he spoke up, his voice shaky. "My grandma, when she was dying, she made us promise not to let her dog Winston see her in the hospital. Said animals shouldn't have to watch people suffer." Jake felt something twist in his chest. Mary had said almost the same thing about their old retriever, Buck. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said softly. "But she was wrong," David continued, struggling to sit up straighter against the fallen log. "Because Luna did see. She knew what I was planning. Animals. They understand more than we give them credit for. That's why she wouldn't leave. That's why she's been crying." Luna shifted position, placing her paw on David's chest in a gesture that was unmistakably protective. The simple act hit Jake like a physical blow, because he'd seen Mary do the exact same thing during their last conversation, her hand on his chest, trying to hold him together when she couldn't hold herself together anymore. "David," Jake said carefully, "I need you to help me understand something. You said Luna was part of your therapy. But this isn't just about rehabilitation, is it? She's not just some assigned animal. You love her." David's laugh was bitter. "Love her. Officer, she saved my life the day they brought her to me. 3-month-old orphan, mother killed by a car. I was in the darkest place I'd ever been, and suddenly I had this tiny broken thing that needed me. For the first time in years, I had a reason to get up in the morning. So why give that up?" Tommy asked, his teenage bluntness cutting straight to the heart of it. If she saved your life, why throw it away? Because I'm selfish, David said, tears flowing freely now. Because every day I keep her, I'm taking away her wildness. She should be free, hunting, having cubs, living the life she was meant to live. Not babysitting some broken soldier who can't get his shit together. Jake felt the pieces clicking into place, the guilt, the self-sacrifice, the twisted logic of depression that turned love into a reason for dying. He'd seen it before, in other veterans, other people carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear. David, look at me. Jake waited until the younger man met his eyes. You're wrong about Luna. Dead wrong. What do you mean? 10 years ago, my daughter got lost in woods just like these. Hypothermia, alone, scared out of her mind. You know what saved her? A mother bobcat and her kits. They kept her warm all night. Took turns sharing body heat with a complete stranger. The vet said it was impossible. Wild bobcats don't do that, but they did. David's brow furrowed. That's not normal behavior. No, it's not. But neither is Luna crying real tears for you. Neither is her refusing to leave your side when every instinct should tell her to run. Jake leaned closer. David, I think Luna might be one of those kits. I think she's been protecting people her whole life, just like her mother did. Tommy was reading through more of David's journal, his face growing pale. Grandpa Joe, there's more here. David found Luna the same week as your daughter's accident. Says the mother cat was killed on the same highway where we found Luna today. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Luna's purring and the distant call of backup teams still trying to reach them through the dense woods. Jesus, David breathed. You think it's the same family? I think, Jake said slowly, that some debts get passed down through generations, and I think Luna isn't trying to save you in spite of her wild nature. She's saving you because of it. Because that's what her family does. Luna looked up at the sound of her name, and Jake would have sworn she understood every word. Those golden eyes held an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct, a purpose that transcended simple domestication. Tommy closed the journal and looked at David with an expression far older than his 16 years. You know what I think? I think you're looking at this all wrong. How's that? David asked. You keep talking about taking away her wildness, like being wild means being alone, but maybe being wild means protecting your family, and maybe you're her family now. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything David believed about guilt and sacrifice and what it meant to love something enough to let it go. Jake's radio crackled again, and this time the signal was clearer. Unit 247, this is Sergeant Rodriguez. We've got search and rescue teams approaching your position from 2 directions, ETA 15 minutes. How's your subject? Stable, but needs immediate medical attention, Jake replied. Be advised, subject has been dealing with PTSD-related crisis. Recommend mental health support on scene. Copy that. Medical team is standing by. David closed his eyes, and for a moment Jake thought he was losing consciousness. But when he opened them again, there was something different there, a spark of something that might have been hope. Officer Thompson, David said quietly, can I ask you something? Shoot. That daughter of yours, the one the Bobcat saved, is she okay now? Jake smiled, thinking of Sarah in her apartment in Dallas, working as a veterinary technician, engaged to a good man who made her laugh. She's more than okay. She's living the life she was meant to live, because someone or something refused to let her die when she couldn't save herself. And do you think she's grateful that she got saved? Every day, Jake said truthfully. She calls it her miracle. Says it taught her that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Luna moved closer to David's face, and he reached up to stroke her spotted fur. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't get better? Then you get better slowly, Tommy said with surprising wisdom. My counselor at school says healing isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up. And Luna's been showing up for you this whole time. In the distance, they could hear voices calling their names, the organized chaos of a search and rescue operation converging on their position. Luna's ears perked up at the sounds, but she didn't move from David's side. David, Jake said urgently, knowing their time alone was running out. I need you to make me a promise. What kind of promise? Promise me you'll give Luna the choice. Don't decide for her what kind of life she should have. Let her show you what she wants. David was quiet for a long moment, studying Luna's face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. And if she chooses to stay with me, even knowing she could be free, then you honor that choice, Jake said simply. And you build a life worth her sacrifice. The sound of approaching rescuers grew louder, and Luna finally lifted her head, alert but not alarmed. She looked at David, then at Jake, then back at David as if making some calculation beyond human understanding. Then she did something that took Jake's breath away. She placed her paw over David's heart and began to purr, not the comfort purr she'd been making, but something deeper, more purposeful. A sound that seemed to say, I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. David started crying again, but this time the tears were different. This time they looked like gratitude. The voices were getting closer now, maybe 5 minutes out, and Jake could hear the systematic calls of the search teams working their way through the underbrush. But in this moment, watching David's face transform as Luna made her choice clear, time seemed suspended. You know, David said, his voice stronger now, I never told anyone about the worst part, about why I really couldn't live with what happened. Jake settled back against a log, recognizing the need to let this story come out before the chaos of rescue arrived. Tommy moved closer too, somehow understanding that this was important. The nurse who died in that convoy, David continued, his hand still stroking Luna's fur. Her name was Maria Santos, 26 years old, from El Paso. She'd joined the army to pay for medical school, wanted to come back and work in free clinics on the border. Luna's purring intensified as if she could sense the pain in David's voice and was trying to absorb it. The night before we moved out, she showed me pictures of her family. Her little brother, who was starting high school, wanted to be a doctor like her. Her parents, who cleaned office buildings to pay for his books. David's voice cracked. She was going to change the world, Officer Thompson. And I let her die because I was too much of a coward to insist on checking that road. Jake felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt, a burden he knew intimately. David, you couldn't have known. But I did know, David interrupted. That's the thing. I saw the fresh dirt. I saw the weird pattern in the tire tracks. Every instinct I had was screaming danger. But Lieutenant Morrison said we were behind schedule, said the intel was solid, and I didn't push back hard enough. The forest around them was quiet except for the distant sounds of rescue teams and Luna's steady purring. Jake found himself thinking about his own moments of doubt, the calls where he'd second-guessed himself, the times when hesitation or protocol had cost someone dearly. You want to know something about guilt? Jake said finally. It's the most selfish emotion there is. Tommy looked up sharply. Grandpa Joe. No. Hear me out, Jake continued, his eyes on David. Guilt says that our pain matters more than the choice of the person who died. Maria Santos chose to serve. She chose to get in that convoy knowing the risks. You taking responsibility for her choice dishonors her decision. David was quiet for a long moment, considering this. I never thought of it that way. 6 months ago, Jake said, his voice growing rough. My wife, Mary, was dying of cancer. Last week of her life, I got called to a robbery at a convenience store. Some punk kid with a gun, probably more scared than dangerous. I could have let another unit handle it, but I thought it would be quick. Thought I'd be back before visiting hours ended. Tommy's face went pale. He knew this story, but he'd never heard his grandfather tell it. Turned into a 4-hour standoff. Kid was high, confused, kept changing his demands. By the time we talked him down, she was unconscious. Never woke up again. Jake's hands were shaking now, and Luna seemed to notice, turning those golden eyes on him with concern. She died while I was doing my job instead of holding her hand. That's why you blame yourself, David said quietly. That's why you understand. That's why I know it's bullshit, Jake replied firmly. Mary knew who she married. 30 years she knew that sometimes the job came first, and she never once asked me to change that. The night she died, she was proud that I was out there protecting people. Me feeling guilty about it doesn't honor her memory. It spits on it. Tommy was crying now, silent tears that he tried to wipe away when he thought no one was looking. You never told me that, Grandpa Joe, about why you weren't there. Because I was ashamed, Jake admitted, because I thought my guilt mattered more than your grandmother's choice to love a cop. The sound of boots crashing through underbrush was getting louder, and Jake could make out individual voices now. But David wasn't finished. Luna was supposed to be released next month, he said. That was the plan. 6 months of preparation, getting her ready to survive on her own, but every test we ran, every assessment, she kept looking for me. Even when they put her in the release enclosure with other Bobcats, she'd spend her time at the fence closest to where I worked. Maybe she knew something you didn't, Tommy suggested. Maybe she knew she wasn't supposed to be released. Or maybe, Jake said, she knew exactly what her purpose was, and it wasn't what everyone else thought it should be. Luna shifted position, and for the first time since they'd found David, she moved away from his side. Jake tensed, wondering if the approaching voices had finally triggered her wild instincts to flee. But instead of running, she walked over to where Tommy sat and placed her head on his knee. Tommy froze, barely breathing. Grandpa Joe. Don't move, Jake said softly. Let her decide. Luna looked up at Tommy with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and something passed between them. Tommy slowly raised his hand and touched the top of her head, and she leaned into the contact like a house cat seeking affection. She's not wild, is she? Tommy whispered. Not completely. She's something new, David said, wonder in his voice. Something between wild and tame. Something that chose love over instinct. The first search team member appeared at the top of the ridge, a paramedic with a full pack, scanning the area with professional efficiency. Down here, Jake called out, waving his arms. Within minutes, the small depression was filled with controlled chaos. Paramedics, search and rescue volunteers, a mental health counselor who'd hiked in with the team. Luna remained calm through all of it, as if she understood that these people were here to help. Sir, I'm Dr. Patricia Williams, the counselor said, kneeling beside David. I understand you've been dealing with some difficult thoughts today. David looked at Jake, then at Tommy, then at Luna, who had returned to his side as the strangers worked around them. I was, he said quietly. But I think I'm ready to try something different now. What's different? Dr. Williams asked gently. I've been thinking about death as a way to stop the pain, David said, his voice growing stronger. But maybe the pain is supposed to teach me something. Maybe Luna's been trying to show me that love isn't about letting go when things get hard. It's about holding on when letting go would be easier. One of the paramedics was working on David's leg, preparing a splint for the hike out. "We're going to need to carry you," he said. "Legs definitely broken, and we don't want to risk further injury." "What about Luna?" David asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Animal control is sending someone," the paramedic replied. "They'll take care of her." "No." David's voice was firm. "She goes with me, or I don't go." Jake stood up, his knees protesting after sitting on the hard ground. "Officer Thompson, Texas Highway Patrol," he said to the team leader. "This animal is evidence in an ongoing investigation. She needs to remain with her handler until we complete our report." It was complete bullshit, and Jake knew it. But it was also the right thing to do, and sometimes that mattered more than protocol. The team leader looked skeptical but nodded. "Your call, officer, but we'll need proper transport for both of them." As they prepared David for the difficult hike out, Luna positioned herself where she could see his face at all times. When they lifted him onto the stretcher, she walked alongside, occasionally placing her paw on his arm as if to reassure him. Tommy fell into step beside Jake as they followed the procession up the ridge. "Grandpa Joe, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "When you found Grandma after she died, do you think she knew? Do you think she knew you were coming back?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Mary's face in those final hours, the way she'd seemed to be waiting for something even in unconsciousness. "I think she knew exactly what kind of man she married," he said finally. "And I think she was proud of that man right up to the end. Even though you weren't there. Especially because I wasn't there. Because it meant I was out doing what she'd spent 30 years supporting me to do." They reached the top of the ridge, and Jake could see the line of emergency vehicles stretching along Highway 35. The crowd of bystanders had grown, drawn by the drama and the chance to see Luna again. News vans were setting up, and Jake could see reporters preparing their cameras. "This is going to be a circus," he muttered. Tommy was looking at his phone, scrolling through social media. "Hat Luna Cried has over 1 million shares," he said. "People are calling her a hero. There's already talk about making a movie." Jake watched as Luna walked calmly beside David's stretcher, seemingly unbothered by the attention awaiting them. "You know what I think, Tommy?" "What?" "I think Luna's been trying to teach us something important about what it means to be human. And maybe it's time we started listening." The media circus hit them like a wall of noise and flashing lights as they emerged from the tree line. News crews from Austin, San Antonio, even Dallas had somehow materialized in the hour they'd been in the woods. Reporters shoved microphones toward David's stretcher, while cameras captured every moment of Luna's steady pace beside him. "Is it true the Bobcat saved your life?" one reporter shouted. "What's your relationship with the animal?" called another. Jake stepped between the stretcher and the cameras, his hand raised. "Back off. This man needs medical attention, not an interview." But the damage was done. Tommy was right. This was going viral in real time. Jake could see people streaming the encounter live on their phones, and the crowd of onlookers had swelled to nearly 100 people, all eager to witness the Bobcat who cried. Dr. Williams, the mental health counselor, was walking close to David's head, monitoring his response to the chaos. "How are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Overwhelmed," David admitted. "I wasn't expecting all this." Luna seemed to sense his distress. She moved closer to the stretcher, occasionally placing her paw on the edge as if to reassure him she was still there. The gesture sent a ripple of awes through the crowd that made Jake's stomach turn. "This is wrong," Tommy said, his young face twisted with anger. "They're treating Luna like some kind of circus act." Jake agreed, but he also knew there was no stopping it now. The story was too perfect, too emotionally compelling for modern media to ignore. A crying bobcat saving a suicidal veteran was guaranteed to break the internet. As they reached the ambulance, David grabbed Jake's arm. "Officer Thompson, I need to ask you something important." "What is it, son?" "If Luna really is related to the bobcats that saved your daughter, If there's some kind of family connection here, what does that mean for her future? Jake looked down at Luna, who was watching the paramedics prepare to load David into the ambulance with obvious anxiety. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think we're about to find out. The paramedic approached with a clipboard. Sir, we can take you to Hill Country Medical Center, but we can't transport the animal. You'll need to make other arrangements. No, David said firmly. Luna goes where I go, or I'm not going anywhere. Sir, that's not possible. Then I'll sign myself out AMA, David interrupted. Against medical advice. You can't force me to go. Jake saw the standoff developing and stepped in. What if we followed the ambulance? I could transport Luna in my patrol car. Dr. Williams shook her head. Mr. Mitchell, you have a serious fracture that needs immediate attention. This isn't negotiable. Everything's negotiable, David replied, his voice taking on an edge that Jake recognized from other veterans he'd dealt with. The tone that said this was a hill he was prepared to die on. Luna seemed to understand the tension. She moved to the open ambulance doors and looked inside, then back at David, then at Jake. Her message was clear. Where is this going, and how do I follow? A new voice cut through the argument. Excuse me, but I think I can help. Jake turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching, wearing the khaki uniform of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Her badge identified her as Dr. Rebecca Johnson, and Jake recognized the name from David's suicide letter. Dr. Johnson, David said, his face going pale. I thought you were in Austin. I was until I got word that one of my rehabilitators was missing in action. She looked at Luna with professional assessment, and apparently making headlines in the process. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. Cameras swiveled to capture this new development. Dr. Johnson, Jake said quietly, we need to talk, privately. She nodded, studying David's face with the kind of intensity that came from years of working with trauma victims. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to ride with you to the hospital. Luna will be fine. I'll make sure of it. How? David asked. Emergency wildlife transport permit. Luna is officially a sanctuary animal under medical supervision. She can go wherever her handler needs to go. Dr. Johnson's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake caught the subtle emphasis on handler. The paramedic looked relieved. That works. Dr. Johnson can sign the liability waivers. As they loaded David into the ambulance, Luna tried to follow. When the paramedic gently blocked her path, she began making that urgent sound again, not quite crying, but close. Let her see him, Dr. Johnson said. She needs to understand he's not disappearing. They boosted Luna up so she could look into the ambulance where David was being strapped to a gurney. He reached out and touched her head one more time. I'll see you at the hospital, girl, he promised. Dr. Johnson will take care of you. Luna seemed to accept this, jumping down and moving to Dr. Johnson's side, but her eyes never left the ambulance. As the emergency vehicle pulled away, sirens wailing, the crowd began to disperse. The show was over, at least for now, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. Dr. Johnson, he said, we need to have a serious conversation about David's mental state. I figured as much. She was watching Luna, who was still staring down the highway where the ambulance had disappeared. How bad? Bad enough. Suicide attempt, carefully planned. If Luna hadn't intervened. Jake let the sentence hang. Dr. Johnson closed her eyes for a moment. I should have seen it coming. He's been struggling since he got back from his last deployment. The PTSD symptoms were getting worse, not better. Tommy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. Why didn't you get him help? We tried, Dr. Johnson said wearily. Therapy, medication, support groups. David's very good at appearing functional when he needs to. And working with Luna seemed to be helping. She was supposed to be good for him. She was good for him, Jake said firmly. She's the reason he's alive. Luna turned at the sound of David's name, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his chest tight. She looked lost, confused about why her person had been taken away in that loud, flashing vehicle. The question now, Dr. Johnson continued, is what happens next. David was scheduled to release Luna next month. She's been cleared for return to the wild by every assessment we've done. But she doesn't want to be wild, Tommy said. Anyone can see that. Dr. Johnson gave him a sharp look. What makes you say that? Tommy gestured to Luna, who was now sitting at his feet, occasionally looking down the highway. Look at her. She's not acting like a wild animal. She's acting like a dog whose owner went to work and didn't come home. Jake had to admit the kid had a point. Luna's behavior was unlike anything he'd seen in his limited experience with wildlife. She was clearly bonded to David in a way that went beyond normal rehabilitation. The problem, Dr. Johnson said, is that keeping a native species as a pet is illegal in Texas. If Luna can't be released, she either stays in a sanctuary for life or... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. There has to be another option, Jake said. There might be. Dr. Johnson pulled out her phone and scrolled through something. We've been developing a pilot program for wildlife ambassadors, animals that can't be released for various reasons but can serve an educational purpose. Luna might qualify. What would that mean for David? Tommy asked. It would mean Luna stays with the sanctuary, but David could continue working with her as her primary handler. It's not the same as ownership, but it would allow them to maintain their bond. Luna looked up at the sound of her name, and Jake saw something that looked like hope in those golden eyes. There's one problem, Dr. Johnson continued. The program is still in development. We need approval from the state, funding, proper facilities. It could take months, maybe years. And in the meantime? Jake asked. In the meantime, Luna stays at the sanctuary while David recovers. And we hope their bond is strong enough to survive the separation. A news van pulled up, and Jake recognized the logo of a major network affiliate. The circus was starting again. Dr. Johnson, Jake said urgently, there's something else you need to know. I think Luna might be connected to my family. A Bobcat family saved my daughter's life 10 years ago, in these same woods. The timing matches up with when you said David found Luna. Dr. Johnson stared at him. You think Luna's mother was one of the cats that saved your daughter? It's possible, more than possible. If that's true, Dr. Johnson paused, thinking through the implications. If Luna has a documented history of human protective behavior going back generations, it could change everything. It could be the basis for a whole new understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. The reporter was approaching now, camera crew in tow. Jake made a decision that surprised him. Doctor, I want to go on record. I want to tell Luna's story, the whole story. If this is going to be a media circus anyway, let's make sure they get it right. Are you sure? Dr. Johnson asked. Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Jake looked down at Luna, who was watching the approaching cameras with calm interest rather than fear. This little lady saved David's life today. She might have saved my daughter's life 10 years ago. If telling her story helps other people understand what we're dealing with here, then that's what we do. Tommy grinned. Can I be in the interview too, Grandpa Joe? You sure you want to be part of this circus? Someone needs to speak for our generation, Tommy said seriously. Someone needs to explain why this matters to young people too. The reporter reached them, microphone extended. Officer Thompson, I'm Jennifer Martinez with KXAN News. We understand you were involved in rescuing the man with the Bobcat. Can you tell us what happened? Jake looked at Luna one more time, then at Tommy, then at Dr. Johnson. Ma'am, What happened here today isn't just about one man and one animal. It's about family, loyalty, and what it means to save someone who can't save themselves. And if you've got time, I'd like to tell you a story about how sometimes the smallest creatures can teach us the biggest lessons about being human. Luna moved closer to Jake's leg, as if she understood that her story was about to be told to the world. And maybe, Jake thought, she did understand. Maybe that was the point all along. The interview had gone viral within hours. Jake sat in the hospital waiting room 3 days later, watching his phone buzz with notifications as #Luna's cry climbed toward 10 million shares. The video of him explaining Luna's family connection, Tommy talking about generational responsibility, and Dr. Johnson discussing the Wildlife Ambassador program had touched something deep in the American consciousness. But nothing had prepared him for what Dr. Johnson was about to tell them. She walked into the waiting room with the kind of expression Jake had learned to dread in his 30 years of delivering bad news. Luna trotted beside her, wearing a new collar with "Emotional Support Animal Do Not Separate" printed in bold letters. "How's David?" Tommy asked immediately. The kid had barely left the hospital since they'd brought David in, sleeping in chairs and living on vending machine food. "Physically, he's healing well. The surgery went perfectly and he should have full use of his leg." Dr. Johnson sat down heavily, and Luna immediately went to her side, pressing against her leg. "Mentally, he's making progress. Dr. Williams thinks he's turned a real corner." "But?" Jake could hear the "but" coming from a mile away. "But we got Luna's test results back this morning." Dr. Johnson's voice was steady, professional, but Jake caught the tremor underneath. "The blood work we did as part of her health assessment before the ambassador program." She paused, unable to continue for a moment. "Just tell us," Tommy said quietly. "Luna has lymphoma, advanced stage. The vet estimates she has maybe 6 months, possibly less." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Luna looked up at Dr. Johnson as if she understood, those golden eyes calm and accepting in a way that broke his heart. "Does David know?" Jake asked. "Not yet. Dr. Williams wants to wait until he's more stable." The news could trigger a setback. Dr. Johnson knelt down and stroked Luna's head. "The ironic thing is, the cancer probably explains her behavior. Animals often become more affectionate, more bonded to their humans when they're sick. It's like they know their time is limited." Tommy was crying now, silent tears that he didn't bother to hide. "So she knew. When she saved David, she knew she was dying." It's possible. Animals are incredibly intuitive about these things. She might have sensed that David needed her more than she needed to worry about her own condition. Jake felt something break inside his chest. Jesus Christ. She saved his life while she was dying herself. Luna walked over to Tommy and placed her head on his knee. The same gesture of comfort she'd shown throughout this ordeal. Even now, facing her own mortality, she was more concerned with comforting others than with her own fear. "There's more," Dr. Johnson said quietly. "I had her tested for genetic markers given your story about the Bobcat family that saved your daughter, Jake. Luna is definitely related to those cats. Based on the DNA analysis, she's almost certainly the daughter of the female who helped Sarah." The revelation should have felt significant, a closing of some cosmic circle. Instead, it just made the tragedy deeper, a family line of protectors, ending with Luna's diagnosis. "What do we do now?" Tommy asked. "We make her last months count," Dr. Johnson said. "The ambassador program has been fast-tracked thanks to all the media attention. Luna's story has generated enough donations to fund it for the next decade. She can live at the sanctuary, work with David if he's up for it, and help educate people about wildlife conservation." "And David?" Jake asked. David gets to spend whatever time Luna has left being her partner instead of her patient. Maybe that's what both of them need. The waiting room door opened and David appeared on crutches, followed by Dr. Williams. His color was better and there was something different in his eyes. Not the hollow desperation Jake had seen in the woods, but a quiet determination. "I heard voices," David said. Then his face lit up when he saw Luna. "There's my girl." Luna bounded over to him, careful not to knock him off balance, and leaned against his good leg. The reunion was simple, wordless, but Jake could feel the depth of connection between them. "David," Dr. Johnson said carefully, "we need to talk about Luna's future, about both of your futures." David studied her face, then looked at Jake and Tommy's expressions. "It's bad news, isn't it?" "Sit down, son," Jake said gently. Dr. Johnson explained the diagnosis as kindly as she could, but there was no way to soften the blow. David listened without speaking, one hand constantly stroking Luna's fur. When she finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. "How long did you say?" David asked finally. 6 months, maybe a little more with treatment." David was quiet for another moment, then something like a smile crossed his face. "You know what's funny? 3 days ago I thought 6 months was too long to live. Now it doesn't feel like nearly enough." Luna looked up at him as if she understood every word. "David," Dr. Williams said gently, "how are you processing this?" "I'm processing that Luna spent the last month of her healthy life saving mine, that she could have lived her remaining time as a wild animal, free and independent, but instead she chose to love someone who was planning to throw his life away." David's voice was steady, but tears were flowing down his cheeks. "I'm processing that I owe her the best 6 months I can possibly give her." Tommy wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "What does that look like?" "It looks like the Wildlife Ambassador program," David said without hesitation. "It looks like Luna teaching kids about conservation and wildlife protection. It looks like her story inspiring other people to choose love over fear, hope over despair. And it looks like me getting my shit together enough to be worthy of the time she's giving me," he added. Dr. Johnson smiled through her own tears. "The program starts next month. We've had schools from across Texas requesting visits. There's even talk of a documentary." "What about the cancer treatment?" Jake asked. "We'll do everything we can to keep her comfortable and extend her time," Dr. Johnson said. "But we won't do anything that compromises her quality of life. Luna's taught us too much about dignity to take that away from her now." David nodded. "She deserves to go out on her own terms." Luna had been listening to this conversation with that uncanny intelligence Jake had noticed from the beginning. Now she moved to the center of their circle and sat down, looking at each of them in turn as if taking attendance. Then she did something that stopped everyone's breath. She began to purr. Not the comfort purr they'd heard before, but something deeper, more resonant. A sound that seemed to say, "I'm not going anywhere yet. We still have work to do." "You know what I think?" Tommy said suddenly. "I think Luna's not scared of dying because she knows her job isn't finished yet. She's got 6 months to teach us something important." "What kind of something?" Dr. Williams asked, her professional curiosity engaged. "How to live like every day matters, how to love without holding back because you're scared of losing someone. How to be brave when everything feels hopeless." Jake looked at his grandson with surprise and pride. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Tommy said, glancing at Luna. "Actually, I had 2 good teachers. Luna showed me what unconditional love looks like, and you showed me what it means to keep going when everything falls apart." "Me?" Jake asked. "Grandpa Joe. You've been carrying Grandma's death like it was your fault for 6 months. But you still showed up when someone needed help. You still did the right thing even when your heart was broken. Luna learned that from somewhere. David laughed, a sound Jake hadn't expected to hear. You know what's crazy? I was ready to kill myself because I thought I was too broken to be worth saving. But Luna's dying, and she's spending her last months teaching other people how to live. Which one of us really understands what life is worth? Dr. Williams made a note in her tablet. David, that's a profound insight. How does that realization feel? Like I've been looking at everything backwards, David said. I thought strength meant being able to handle anything alone. But Luna's showing me that real strength is letting people love you even when you can't love yourself. The afternoon sun was streaming through the hospital windows, and Luna had positioned herself where the light fell warmest on the floor. She looked peaceful, content, like someone who had found their purpose and was at peace with the price it required. So, what happens now? Jake asked. Now we go home, David said. Luna and I start the ambassador program. We tell her story to anyone who'll listen. We teach kids that wildlife matters, that every creature has value, that sometimes the smallest acts of love can save lives. And we do it all knowing that every day is borrowed time? Dr. Johnson asked. Especially knowing that, David replied, because that's what makes each day precious. Luna stood up and walked to the window, pressing her nose against the glass as if she could smell the forest beyond the city. For a moment, Jake wondered if she was having second thoughts, if some wild instinct was calling her back to the woods for her final months. But then she turned back to their little group, walked to David's chair, and settled at his feet with a contented sigh. Her choice was clear. This was her pack. This was her purpose. This was where she belonged. You know what Luna's really teaching us? Jake said quietly. She's teaching us that love isn't about how much time you have. It's about what you do with the time you've got. Tommy looked up from his phone where he'd been reading comments on their viral video. People are already calling her Saint Luna. There are support groups forming, fundraisers for wildlife conservation, even a children's book deal. Fame, David said with a wry smile. That's the last thing she wanted. But Luna looked remarkably unbothered by the idea of celebrity. She seemed to understand, with that wisdom that transcended species, that her story had grown beyond her individual life. She had become a symbol of something larger. Hope, loyalty, the kind of love that doesn't count the cost. 6 months, David repeated, testing the words. 6 months to change the world. 6 months to let the world change us, Jake corrected gently. As if she agreed, Luna lifted her head and looked directly at him, those golden eyes holding a message he was finally beginning to understand. Time isn't about quantity. It's about purpose. And purpose, when shared with love, can last forever. Outside the hospital window, the Texas sky was turning the color of desert roses, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to the approaching night. Luna's ears perked up at the sound, not with longing but with recognition. She was still wild enough to hear the ancient songs, still tame enough to choose love over instinct. In 6 months, that voice would be silenced forever. But the echo of her choice, the ripple effects of her love, would continue long after the last sunset she would see. That, Jake realized, was what immortality really looked like. 6 months later, Jake stood in the packed auditorium at the Texas State Capitol watching Luna work her magic one last time. The Wildlife Ambassador program had exceeded everyone's expectations, reaching over 50,000 children across the state. But today was different. Today was Luna's farewell. She sat calmly on the stage next to David, who looked healthier than Jake had seen him in years. The cancer treatments had bought Luna an extra month, but her body was finally giving in. This would be her last public appearance, her final lesson to the world. Luna taught me that heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms, David was saying to the audience of children, parents, and state officials. Sometimes they wear spotted fur and have golden eyes that see right into your soul. Luna turned at the sound of her name, and even from his seat in the back, Jake could see the effort it took her to lift her head. But when she looked out at the crowd of children in the front rows, something like joy sparked in those tired eyes. Governor Patricia Martinez stepped to the podium. Today, we're not just saying goodbye to Luna, we're celebrating the legacy she's created. The Luna Wildlife Protection Act, which you all help support, will provide funding for wildlife conservation and mental health programs for veterans across Texas. The applause was thunderous, but Luna seemed unbothered by the noise. She had learned to find peace in crowds, to accept love from strangers, to understand that her story had grown beyond her individual life. Tommy, now 17 and a regular volunteer at the sanctuary, sat in the front row with a group of kids from his high school. Jake smiled, watching his grandson explain something to a younger child who was crying about Luna's illness. The kid had learned to carry forward the lessons Luna had taught them all. Before we close, Governor Martinez continued, I'd like to invite Officer Jake Thompson to the stage. Officer Thompson's family has a special connection to Luna's family line, and he's been instrumental in documenting her story. Jake felt his knees protest as he stood up, but he made his way to the stage where Luna waited. When he approached, she struggled to her feet and walked slowly to him, pressing her head against his hand in the gesture of trust that had become her signature. Luna, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, I want to tell you something I should have said 10 years ago. He knelt down, ignoring the pop of his aging joints, and looked directly into her eyes. Your mama saved my daughter's life when Sarah was lost in the woods. I never got to thank her, and I've carried that debt my whole life. But you've taught me that some debts get paid forward, not backward. You saved David's life, you saved my relationship with my grandson, and you've probably saved thousands more lives through the people you've inspired. Luna's tail twitched, the closest thing to a wag a bobcat could manage, and she leaned more heavily against his hand. Jake could feel how frail she'd become, but also how peaceful she seemed. In my 30 years as a cop, Jake continued, I thought I knew what service looked like. But you've shown me that real service isn't about wearing a badge or carrying a gun. It's about showing up for people when they need you most, even when it costs you everything you have. The auditorium was completely silent now, hundreds of people hanging on every word. Luna's taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice, and she's made that choice every single day of her life, even when it hurt, even when it was hard, even when she knew her time was running out. Jake stood up slowly, and Luna followed him back to where David sat waiting. David, the governor said, would you like to say anything final? David struggled to his feet, his legs still not completely healed from the break, and Luna immediately moved to support him, letting him rest his weight against her side. Even in her weakness, she was still taking care of him. 6 months ago, I thought my story was ending, David said, his voice steady and clear. I thought I was too broken to be worth saving, too damaged to contribute anything meaningful to the world. Luna disagreed. He paused, stroking her head gently. She taught me that being broken isn't the opposite of being valuable. Sometimes it's what makes you valuable. She showed me that you don't have to be perfect to love someone perfectly. And she proved that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on someone who's given up on themselves. Luna looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Jake saw something pass between them, a conversation without words, a goodbye that transcended species. Luna's leaving us today, David continued. But she's not really gone. Every kid who learns to respect wildlife because of her story. Every veteran who chooses to keep fighting because they remember her courage. Every person who decides to love a little braver because they saw what she was willing to sacrifice. That's Luna living on. The applause started slowly, a few people at first, then building until the entire auditorium was on its feet. But Jake wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching Luna, who had settled at David's feet with the contented sigh of someone whose work was finally complete. After the ceremony, a smaller group gathered at the Hill Country Wildlife Sanctuary for Luna's final hours. Jake, Tommy, David, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Williams, and a handful of volunteers who had worked with Luna throughout her ambassador career. The media had been respectfully asked to stay away. This moment was private, personal, sacred. Luna lay on her favorite blanket in the sunshine outside the sanctuary building, surrounded by people who loved her. Her breathing was labored now, but peaceful. Dr. Johnson had explained that they could make her passing easier when the time came, but Luna seemed to be choosing her own timeline. "You know what I realized today?" Tommy said, sitting cross-legged beside Luna's blanket. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid. But Luna was probably scared lots of times. When she was orphaned, when she had to leave David to get help, when she got sick. But she kept going anyway." "That's exactly what courage is," Dr. Williams said softly. "Feeling the fear and choosing love anyway." David was lying on the ground next to Luna, his face close to hers, speaking in the quiet voice he used for their private conversations. Jake couldn't hear the words, but he could see the depth of connection between them, a bond that had literally saved both their lives. As the afternoon wore on, other animals from the sanctuary seemed to sense what was happening. A deer appeared at the edge of the clearing, standing motionless for several minutes before disappearing back into the woods. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, calling once before flying away. Even the sanctuary's resident owls could be heard hooting softly from their enclosures. "It's like they're saying goodbye," Tommy whispered. "Maybe they are," Dr. Johnson said. "Animals understand death differently than we do. For them, it's just another part of the natural cycle." As the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose, Luna's breathing became more irregular. David moved even closer, his arm draped gently over her side. "I love you, Luna," he said clearly. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be brave." Luna's eyes found his face, and Jake would swear she smiled, that same expression of peace and purpose he'd seen from the beginning. "Thank you for choosing us," Jake added, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing us what real love looks like." Luna's gaze moved around the circle, touching each face as if memorizing them. When her eyes met Tommy's, the teenager reached out and touched her paw gently. "I promise I'll remember," Tommy said. "I promise I'll tell your story." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Luna took a deeper breath, held it for a moment, and then simply let go. Her passing was quiet, peaceful, surrounded by love, exactly as she had lived. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft sounds of the Texas evening, crickets beginning their chorus, the distant call of a mockingbird, the whisper of wind through the oak trees. "She's free now," David said finally, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "She was always free," Jake corrected gently. "She just chose to share that freedom with us." In the months that followed, Luna's story continued to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. The children's book became a bestseller. The documentary won an Emmy. The wildlife sanctuary expanded, funded by donations from people around the world who had been touched by Luna's story. David returned to work as a wildlife rehabilitator, specializing in animals with special needs. He never took on another permanent partner. Luna had been unique, irreplaceable, but he carried her lessons into every interaction with every animal in his care. Tommy started college with a major in wildlife biology, determined to continue Luna's work in conservation. He often spoke at schools, telling Luna's story to new generations of children who hadn't been alive to meet her, but who could still learn from her example. Jake retired from the force 6 months after Luna's death, but he didn't retreat into solitude as he'd once planned. Instead, he became a volunteer at the sanctuary, helping other veterans who came there for animal-assisted therapy. Mary would have been proud, he thought, to see him finally learning to accept help and offer healing in return. 1 year after Luna's death, they dedicated a bronze statue in her honor at the sanctuary entrance. It showed her in her characteristic pose, head raised, eyes alert, one paw extended as if reaching out to touch someone's heart. The inscription, suggested by Tommy and approved by everyone who had known her, read simply, "Luna, she taught us that love is a choice, and she chose us every day." On the anniversary of her death, Jake stood before that statue with Tommy and David, watching a group of school children learn about wildlife conservation from one of the sanctuary's new ambassadors, a rehabilitated red-tailed hawk named Hope. "You think she knows?" Tommy asked. "You think Luna knows how many lives she's still changing?" Jake looked up at the Texas sky where a red-tailed hawk circled high overhead, calling once before disappearing into the blue. "I think she knows," he said, "and I think she's proud." As they walked back toward the sanctuary building, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced since Mary's death, a sense of completion, of purpose fulfilled. Luna had taught him that grief and gratitude could coexist, that ending and beginning were sometimes the same thing, that love shared was never truly lost. The work continued. The lessons lived on, and somewhere in the Texas sky, a small spotted spirit watched over the sanctuary she had helped create, still teaching, still loving, still choosing hope over fear, one heart at a time. In the end, that was Luna's greatest gift, not just the lives she saved directly, but the understanding that every act of love, no matter how small, creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. She had been a wild animal who chose civilization, a dying creature who chose to live fully, a small spirit who taught the world that size has nothing to do with strength. And in a world that often felt divided, Luna had shown them all something beautifully simple. Love recognizes no boundaries, loyalty knows no limits, and sometimes the most profound teachers come in the smallest packages. The lesson would echo through generations, carried forward by every child who learned her story, every veteran who found hope in her example, every person who chose to love a little braver because they remembered a bobcat who cried real tears and changed the world. Friends, Luna's story reminds us of something we sometimes forget in our golden years, that our greatest purpose often comes not from what we achieve, but from whom we choose to love unconditionally. Like many of you, Officer Jake Thompson thought his best days were behind him after losing his beloved Mary. At 58, facing retirement and an empty house, he believed his story was ending. But Luna, a dying bobcat with tears in her eyes, taught him that real living begins when we stop counting our remaining years and start making our remaining years count. She showed 3 generations, Jake, David, and young Tommy, that healing happens not when we avoid pain, but when we transform our wounds into wisdom that serves others. Luna's 6 months of dying became the most meaningful period of her life because she chose to spend them loving without reservation, teaching without expectation, and giving hope to those who had lost their way. As we navigate our own autumn seasons, facing losses and limitations, Luna whispers this truth: your broken places don't disqualify you from greatness. They might just be where your light shines brightest. Every day we wake up is another chance to be someone's Luna. What person in your life taught you that broken doesn't mean worthless? How are you choosing to love without counting the cost in your golden years? Share your Luna moments below. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today.